Good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Motoyuki Shibata. We are very happy to be here to launch the latest issue of our journal Monkey Business. And we have invited two very exciting Japanese writers. Back when I was a student, which is about half a century ago, literature was very serious in Japan. People believed the more difficult it was, the better it was, or that's what we tried to believe. Then, back in the late 70s or in the early 80s, Haruki Murakami and a bunch of new writers came along, and suddenly literature was more fun. And these new writers took the cue from American writers like Kurt Vonnegut or Richard Rorty, and these new writers managed to be more accessible and profound at the same time. And then in the 1990s or the 2000s, a newer generation came along, and they took things one step further, especially in terms of the prose. Suddenly, literary language was like music, and the language was more like a musical instrument, and the prose was more difficult than the prose of the older generation, but not difficult in the sense of older writers. So difficult, but there was this huge sense of exuberance and the sheer energy, and a lot of fun. It's of course very hard on translators, but fortunately we have a number of wonderful translators from Japanese to English, and we work with all of them in Monkey Business. So we have two great Japanese writers and two wonderful translators too. So we first, so these two Japanese writers are I would say, the best representative of this new wave. This is Mieko Kawakami, and this is Hideo Furukawa. So we start with Mieko.
Hi, I'm Mieko Kawakami. Thank you for coming. I'm very happy to be here.今日は、モンキービジネスの最新刊に、載せてもらった私の赤ちゃんという詩を読み、そしてそれについてお話ししたいと思います。
Today I'm going to read from a piece from the latest issue of Monkey Business. It's a poem titled My Baby.
今日は最初と最後に朗読をして、その間にちょっとお話をします。
So I'll read some from the beginning of the poem and then some from the end, and then I will discuss the poem in the end.
You have to put your face mouth closer to me. Maybe sit closer to it.
痛みは思っていたほどじゃなかった。時間は9時間。この日のためにアジサイの植わった土から用意した寝室に早朝に入っていって、カーテンを取り払って気になっていたクッキーを食べてうとうととしていると、夕方にはもう生まれていた。そう言うとみんな、ラッキーね、私なんて額縁を用意するところまで行ったんだから、やっぱりあなたは若いからねとお祝いの言葉よりも先に口々にそう言ってくれるので、そうなんだ、と彼女は答えて、そこから火曜日を2つ眠った。
The pain was not as bad as she had expected. 9 hours. Okay. The pain was not as bad as she had expected. 9 hours altogether. It was early morning when she entered the bedroom, created just for this day from the soil where hydrangeas had grown. She had removed the curtains, eaten some cookies, and was just nodding off that evening when the baby was born. When she told people this, they all said, "You're so lucky. My labor lasted so long that I decorated my room with picture frames. It's because you're still so young." "I guess I am," she responded, and fell into a deep sleep for 2 consecutive Tuesdays.
生まれてきたのはそれまで何度もエコーで覗き見していた通り、素晴らしいカーブを持った赤ん坊だった。私の子供と彼女は思ったけれど、いいえ、やっぱり子供というにはあまりにも小さく丸いような印象ばっかりが目にしみるので、私の赤ちゃんというのがぴったりだった。私の赤ちゃん。見れば見るほどよくできていて、特に頭についた歯の部分。まだこんなにも小さいというのに、ちゃんとした鋭さのあるその銀色は、じっと見ていると吸い込まれてしまうくらいに真新しく、空気に触れた途端、ちょっとだけ鈍くはなったけれど、それでもまだ正真正銘の生まれたての光り方で、こんなに綺麗で痛いけなものが自分のお腹の中にあったのだと思うと、よくわからないけれど、面はゆくって、それでいて誇らしいような気持ちが胸の下の方からこみ上げてくるのがわかる。いつもならそうして浮かんできたものは、指先でつまんでしばらく見つめた後、キリがないのでそのあたりに捨ててしまうのに、忘れないように、記念的に。そんな考えがふっとよぎって、彼女は一つ一つを大切に扱い、母子手帳のビニールの部分にそっと挟んで時々眺めた。何かがこうして生まれること自体、それは誰の努力のせいでもおかげでもないのだけれど、彼女は彼女のそんなに大きくはない手のひらの上で、まだ目も開けていない自分の赤ん坊を見つめながら、その持ち手の部分を指先で何度も撫でた。
The baby had the same splendid curve she had seen so many times in the ultrasound. "Here's my child," she thought. But no, it was too tiny and too round to be called a child. "Here's my baby." That's more like it. My baby. The more she looked, the more perfect the baby seemed. She particularly admired the set of teeth that lined the top of its head. The silver blades already had a proper sharpness, even though the baby was so tiny. Their utter newness mesmerized her. Contact with air did make the blades a little blunt, but still they retained their newborn shine. The thought that this beautiful, helpless thing had grown inside her tickled her and made her proud. Under normal circumstances, she would pick at such emotions with her fingers and then toss them aside. But this time was different. "I must remember, I must commemorate," she told herself. And so she carefully slipped each and every piece of emotion into the vinyl pouch inside the maternity health log, so that she could admire them now and then. A life coming into being was the most natural thing in the world, yet she could only marvel at the baby that lay snug in her small palm, its eyes yet to open, as she caressed its handle again and again with her fingertips.
これは私の赤ちゃんという詩なんですけれども、皮むき器の赤ちゃんなんですね。産んだのが皮むき器の子だ。皮むき器の赤ちゃん。
So this is a piece called My Baby, but it's about a baby that is not a human baby, but it's actually a peeler.
で、それを私この詩を書いたのが赤ん坊を産んで本当に何日か経ってすぐの時で、本当に生まれたてのあんまり自分の体験とフィクションを書くっていうことはあんまり連動しないんですけど、ちょっとやっぱりインパクトの大きい出来事だったので、ちょうど一つ詩を書かないといけない時期で、それが出てきたんですね。
So when I wrote this poem, it was actually only a few days after I gave birth myself. And normally I don't write directly from my own experience. I don't connect fiction and my experience. But it was such a momentous event for me that I needed to write something, and so I wrote this poem.
で、川向きの赤ん坊を産んだっていうのがどこから出てきたかはちょっとわからないんですけど、ただこの母親はずっと川向きの赤ちゃんをずっと見ていて、いつかすぐにバラバラになったり壊れてしまうんじゃないかっていうことをすごく危惧していて、でちょうど地震があって原発事故があったんですね。私たち何もわからない状態でもう生活することに結構不安、もうずっと継続的な不安を感じている中でのやっぱり出産と育児だった。でそのことも多分反映されてると思うんですけど、この詩の。
So I don't remember exactly why I came up with the idea of this peeler baby, but in the story, in the poem, the mother is watching over her baby that she just gave birth to, and she's consumed by this feeling of fear that it was going to die, that it was going to disintegrate. And right when I was raising my newborn, taking care of my newborn, there was the earthquake and the nuclear disaster, and there was just generally this feeling of anxiety over life and everyday life and living, and that feeling was really connected to the creation of this poem.
でこの詩の中ではミースっていう得体の知れない存在があって、いつかミースっていうものがこの自分のベイビー赤ん坊を食べに来るんじゃないかということをすごく恐れてる詩なんですね。で結局ミースがやっぱり来て食べられてしまって、その赤ん坊を探すんですけれども、もうバラバラに何しろ皮むき器なのでバラバラになってて、最後のピースが見つからないっていうところで終わる詩なんですね。
So in the story, there's a mysterious creature called the Meese, and the mother is obsessed with this creature and the fear that it was going to come and eat her baby. And indeed, the Meese does come and eat the baby, and she goes on this journey to look for the missing pieces. And in the end, she just can't find that last piece. And the poem ends with that fact.
で私は詩と、小説の両方を書くんですが、
So I write both poetry and prose.
で詩からスタートしていて、詩では何でも起こすことができるんですね。例えばホットケーキを焼き続けて塔にして上で家族全員で登っていって破綻するみたいな話とか。
So I write poetry and prose, but I started my career by writing poetry, and in poetry anything is possible. So I can bake a stack of pancakes and that becomes a tower, and the whole family can go climb up that tower. Anything can happen.
あるいは自分の舌がどんどん伸びていってそこに全てが見えて飲み込まれて消えてしまうとか。
Or my tongue will just grow infinitely, and then that tongue will go and come back and consume me and swallow me whole.
でも小説でなぜか私はそれをすることができないというか、あんまりする気になれないんですね。
But for some reason, when I write novels or prose, I can't have that same kind of liberty.
それは最近なんでかなっていうことを考えるんですが、どうも私は詩と小説っていうものの原動力みたいなものとして言葉そのものと物語っていう風に分けて考えてるんじゃないかなっていう風に気づきました。
And I often think about why I can do certain things in poetry and certain other things in prose, and why I think about those two as such different genres. And I've come to think that I probably separate writing about language and then writing a story. So the poem being about language and the prose being more about the story.
でそれは人の小説を読んでいても時々感じることなんですけど、果たして小説の中でなら不思議なことを本当に好きなだけ起こしていいのかっていうのはよく感じるんですよね。
I also have the same kind of idea when I read other people's novels, and I often wonder whether it's possible to write about such fantastical things in novels.
だからこうすごく不思議な設定がポンとある、あるいは不思議な状況とか登場人物がいて、何か不思議なお話っていうのがまあ常にあるんですけれども、そのじゃあ本当の想像力を通して出来上がってきた物語と妄想の違いっていうのをよく考えるんです。
So I can write about fantastical settings or fantastical characters, but I often wonder about the distinction between stories that were made out of imagination and then stories that were made out of kind of delusion.
どうもやっぱりこう出落ちって言うと難しいと思うんですけど、設定だけして各妄想だけではやはり私は物語にならないじゃないかと思っている。でも妄想っていうのはやっぱり何かを書いているような錯覚を書き手にも読み手にも与えるという罠があると思うんです。出落ちはなくて。
So I think about this idea of delusion, but I think there's.
妄想だけでは妄想と、ちゃんと想像力を通過した物語との違いっていうものが必ずあって、妄想はやっぱり小説の力にはならないと思ってる。
So I do think there is a difference between imagination and delusion, and imagination can really drive a story forward, but I really don't think that a story can come out of sheer delusion.
私が詩で今さっき読んだような詩でやっていることは、じゃあなぜできるのかというと、やはりそこには、意味とか物語っていうものをこう請け負ってないっていう実感があるんですね。ワンダーというか、もう言葉の出来事で閉じたらそれはもう再生できないというか、その言葉の上でしか起きないイメージとして私は詩を多分考えているので、それができるんじゃないかと思う。でも小説は物語だと思っているので、何らかのやっぱり責任を感じてしまう。
So in poems, I don't feel a responsibility towards kind of making a meaning or kind of telling a story, and it's really all about language for me and discovering the possibilities of language. But with a novel, I feel this responsibility towards telling a story, so that's really a difference.
で小説はみんな言葉、基本的に読めるし書けるし、日本なんか特にだから小説っていうのは誰でも書ける、基本的には懐の深いものだっていう理解はあるんですが、故にやはり難しいものであって。
So, most people can read and people can write. So a novel is kind of a genre that envelops a wide range of writings, and so many people can read it and write it. At the same time, it's also a difficult thing to write.
小説にものすごく不思議な設定とかシチュエーションとか、奇怪な出来事を起こすための資格みたいなものについてよく考えてるんです。
So I often think about the right to create kind of very fantastical situations and happenings in novels.
でもちろん何も考えないで自然に出てくる不思議なイメージとか不思議な言葉をただ書く。でもそれが作品として成立する場合もあると思うんですよね。それは多分それを読んでくれた人がそれを何らかの意味のある物語と思ってくれればそれは成立するんだけれども、
Sometimes the work can be created without thinking too much about meaning or characters, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it's the readers who can absorb the meaning out of what's been created.
書き手の倫理としては自分の感じたこととか 浮かんできたイメージとかだけを書くのではいけないと。そのイメージとかいわゆるその物語になる前の妄想みたいなところをずっと突き進んでいっていくだけではやっぱりダメなんですよね。
But from the writer's perspective, I don't think it's enough to just write about what I've felt or what I've imagined. I think that I need to really delve into what's the driving force behind whether delusion or imagination that I've started with.
小説にはやっぱり行ってより自分の帰ってくる力っていうのがすごく大事だと思うんです。で、帰ってくる力っていうのが一体何なのかっていうことをやっぱ思うんですよね。それは教養なのか、例えばね、自分がそれはまあロジックの力なのか、それとも書き終わった後にそれを自分がどれだけ理解できる批評力なのか。
So in a novel, I think you have to first go all the way, follow your imagination, but then what's important is the effort to come back. And I often think about what this means, this ability to come back, whether it's culture, whether it's logic, whether it's the critical power to kind of assess what I've created.
柴田先生どう思われます？例えば柴田先生本当にたくさんその先生お読みになってるいろんな国の高等無形なお話ある。でも話を読んできて、それでもやっぱりよく本当に物語と成立しているワンダーとやっぱり妄想の域を出ないワンダーってやっぱどうしてもあると思うんですよ。その違いってどこにあると思われますか？
Yeah, so you've read so many novels and stories. What is the difference between stories that are truly successful stories and just delusions?
言葉でその小説世界の中にこういう現実があり得るんだということを、説得するような、力があるっていうことじゃないですかね。
やっぱりそれはその小説の中のリアリティ。
I mean, I'm no writer, so I can only guess. But my feeling is that if you write a fantastic fiction, and if it's going to be good, the narrative has to create its own reality, and that reality has to be convincing. It may sound absurd, it may be quite out of common sense, but it needs to appear. It needs to feel as if it's. As if it has its own, reality or its own logic, or it has to make sense in its own way. I know there's one writer in America who writes fiction that way, Mr. Barry Yarbrough. Barry.
その今柴田先生がおっしゃったのそれをそのリアリティを支えるっていうのはやっぱ帰ってくる力だと思うんですよね。その帰ってくる力っていうのは作品によってもやっぱりちょっと変わってくると思う。
So what you were saying about constructing a reality within the fiction is I think what I'm talking about coming back, to coming back to the ability to come back.
そのことを最近よく考えるようになってきていて、でだんだん私の書くその小説の方ももちろん不思議なことは起きるんですけれども、どうしてもやっぱり夢という形を取ってしまったりとか、そういうふうにやっぱりなんかまだリアリティ、小説におけるリアリティの構築にまだちょっと足踏みしている状態なのかもしれないんですよね。でなんか最近よくそれについて考えています。
And so I've been thinking about that a lot. And in my novels, strange things do happen, but they often take the shape of dreams, for example. So there's a sense that I'm still grounded in reality. But I have been thinking about that.
それは私が詩と小説っていう2つをやっぱり分けて考えてるっていうか、2つあるっていう認識から出てきてる おそらくもしかしたらそれがもう本当になんか私の小説を好きな人はあなたの詩は良くないというで詩をすごく好きな人はあなたの小説は窮屈だって言ってやっぱり分かれてるそれはいいことなのかどうか分からないんだけれどもこの2つが来年私その書き始めて10年になるんですがまたそこがちょっとなんかラインがなってきてなんか予感は感じています。
So I think it's because of this strong divide within myself, my understanding of the difference between poems and prose, and it tends to be that people who like reading my novels do not like my poetry. People who like my poetry think my novels are too conventional or something like that, and I don't really know what to make of that. But next year. It's going to be 10 years since I've started writing, so I've been reflecting about all of those things and thinking about lines and boundaries in that 10-year mark. So.
でその最初に読んだ今日の「私の赤ちゃん」という詩に戻ると子供は皮むき器ですから、子供の最大の喜びというのはいろんなものの皮を剥くことなんですね。
And to go back to discussing the story, the poem, My Baby, the baby is a peeler, so the greatest joy for the baby is to go out into the world and peel things.
それでこの子は立派な皮むき器になるだろうと産んだ時にいろんなものの皮を剥いて崖を剥いていろんなもうありとあらゆるものの皮を剥くだろうっていうふうに思っていたけれども子供はミースに食べられていなくなってで最後の部品を探し求めているところから朗読したいと思います。
So in the poem, the mother, when she gives birth, dreams that it's going to be this splendid peeler. It's going to go into the world and peel all sorts of things like cliffs. But in the story, the baby is eaten by the meese. And so the last bit that I'm going to read now is the mother going on a journey to look for the last missing piece.
けれども最後の部品が何年経っても見つからない。喉の石だけがいつまで経っても見つからない。彼女は赤ん坊をたらしめるたった一つの物心を書いて、けれどもそれでも紛れもないたった一つの赤ん坊の体を抱きしめて、ありとあらゆる時間と場所へ、ただ赤ん坊に会うために赤ん坊を探し続けた。匂いだけを手がかりに、過去と未来と嘘と真実に横たわるその間の無数の点で時々眠り、目を覚ましては自分を責め、それは35年にも及ぶ旅になった。存在するすべての果物に沈みながら、一斤のパンを崩して進み食台を登り、絨毯をかき分けテーブルを乗り越え水たまりを泳ぎ切り、そこがまだ剥かれていないことを確かめる。彼女の赤ん坊がいつかそこに来る余地のまだあることを気の遠くなるような時間をかけて確かめる。彼女は再び映画を燃やし、何度も木の幹を滑り落ち、足を進め、這ってゆく。また最初から何度でも繰り返し果物を砕き、パンをくぐって絨毯をつかみ、食台をかみしめテーブルを叩き、水たまりを飲み干して、彼女と彼女の赤ん坊をつなぐものを二人で過ごしたあまりに短い時の粒を祈るようにかき集めながら彼女は行く。映画を濡らし木の幹を粉にしてそうして死ぬ間際にたどり着いた崖の上。彼女の胸のどこもかもが錆びてしまって彼女と同じように朽ちてしまった赤ん坊の体を抱きしめ彼女が最後につぶやいたのはこう。会いたい。私はまだあなたと話したことがない。ありがとうございました。
Yet, no matter how many years passed, she could not find the last piece. She could not find the stone that shone on the baby's throat, the one piece that made her baby truly a baby. Clasping to her breast the assemblage of parts, she went on searching far and wide, across time and space. With the baby's scent her only clue, she traversed the vast space between the past and the future, between lies and truth, at times drifting off to sleep and awakening to blame herself once more. The journey lasted 35 years. She plunged into every fruit in existence, demolished loaves of bread, ascended candlesticks, tore through rugs, clambered over tables, swam through puddles, all the while ascertaining that nothing had been peeled. She had to make sure, however long it took, that her baby might arrive there someday. Then she would burn through films once more, slide down trees, push forward her legs and crawl on all fours. She would start from the beginning, over and over, smashing fruit, ducking under bread loaves, grasping rugs, gnawing candlesticks, banging on tables, swallowing puddles. She scraped together, as if in prayer, the beads of the memories of the 2 brief times she spent with her baby, and went on soaking films, smashing trees, and just before her death, she arrived at the top of the cliff, and to her chest she clasped her baby's body, which had rusted and decayed over time, just like her own, and these were her last words. "I miss you, my baby. You've never even uttered a word." Thank you.
Thank you, Mieko and Hitomi. The translator is Hitomi Yoshio, our interpreter. Okay, before we go on to ask Hideo to discuss his own work, Roland Kelts is going to talk a little bit about monkey business to put things in perspective.
I'm just going to introduce the publication. Some of you may know what it's about, but well, first of all, I want to thank Kinokuniya, the bookstore here, for hosting us today. John Fuller, the floor manager, who's hosted us a couple of times now already. It's really an honor to be here at this wonderful bookstore. I actually had the privilege of appearing in 2 Kinokuniyas in 1 month. I gave a talk at the Tokyo Shinjuku store earlier in April, so it's really great to be in this bookstore here in New York City this time. Monkey Business, this is the 6th volume of Monkey Business, and it's an annual publication. The English language edition is an annual publication that really got started when Motoyuki Shibata, whose chair I just stole, and Ted Goossen decided that they would take the Japanese language Monkey Business, which was founded in 2008, and try to create an annual English language edition of the publication. Now, these guys are very, very inventive and creative, so they didn't just take the original Japanese and turn it into an English language publication. They took some material from the original Japanese and then brought new material to the project, including material by other Japanese writers, including poetry, including manga, including photo essays, interviews. So this publication is really chock full of all kinds of different literary and cultural artifacts. It's really a thrilling publication, and I'm certainly honored to be a part of this project in a small way. One of the things I helped do was to establish a relationship with a US-based publishing partner, and that is a magazine called A Public Space, which is based in Brooklyn. And they've been our partner in this publishing project for 6 years now. And I also have to mention the extraordinary support we received from our New York staff. Tiffany Ferrantini, who's our Master of Operations here in New York, and Sayaka Toyama, who is also indispensable to the publication here in New York City. And of course, our fantastic editor, who's sort of come on board in the past year and a half or so, Meg Taylor, who's here with us tonight as well. So, as always with these things, it's a team project, and we depend on people here in the US, we depend on people in Canada, and we depend on people in Japan. And I'm very happy to say that we not only launched the publication here in New York, but we've done so in Toronto, Canada. We're going back to Chicago next week. We've done a West Coast tour, which literally went all the way up the coast of California. And we've now introduced the publication in Manila, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, which we're going back to next month, and in Singapore at the Singapore Writers Festival. So the monkey just keeps branching out and expanding. And happy to say we have issue 6 here. It looks like they've got 6, 5, and 4 here on sale this evening, and the authors and editors will sign it if you're interested in having it signed. So thank you very much for coming out today. I'm going to turn it over to Moto and Hideo. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Roland is our contributing editor, and he's also the author of this wonderful book entitled Japan America. It's about how Japanese anime influenced American culture, and it's a must-read book if you're interested in, what happens when the two cultures influence each other. It's a wonderful book, and he'll be happy to sign the book for you too. Okay. Right. So Hideo Furukawa.
殺伐ちゃんが将来なりたいものは気象予言士。
Desolation girl wants to be a weather oracle when she grows up.
クラスに女の子が転校してきたんだけれど、彼女の父親は海洋観測船に乗っていて、それで親子もろとも海に落ちたことがあるとか何とか言っていて、荒海に転落した挙句に無人島に漂着して暮らしていて、その島での生活は結構過酷だったわとか何とか言っているので、私たちは彼女を殺伐ちゃんと名付けた。
Get ready, it's going to be like that. This new girl transferred into our class, and I guess she was on this research vessel with her dad when they fell into the ocean or something, and after dropping into the stormy sea, they drifted ashore on a desert island where life really was brutal, so we decided to call her Desolation Girl.
当たり前だけれども、殺伐ちゃんには異様なオーラがあって、私たちはそれに初めから息を飲み、それで普通だったらこうしたタイプの転校生はいじめられたりするのかもしれないけれど、私たちは気を抜いたら殺伐ちゃんになぎ倒されてしまうのが直感できたので、いじめるどころかウェルカームな態度でどうにか殺伐ちゃんを理解してみようと試みた。
Of course, Desolation Girl had a strange aura, and we were all spellbound from day one. So even though that sort of transfer student usually gets bullied or whatever, we kind of knew instinctively that she would mow us all down if we dropped our guard. So rather than haze her, we actually welcomed her into the class with open arms and did our best to understand her.
2週目の給食の時間に騒動があったけれども、それは殺伐ちゃんがとっても日本的な和洋折衷の献立に愕然としてからであって、話を聞いてみたらクラス3人もしきりにうなずいてしまって、その情報は給食室まで伝えられて、調理師が3人殺伐ちゃんとメールアドレスを交換するまでに至って、私たちの間には大いなる敬意というものが育まれた。
It was a big deal during the lunch the second week when Desolation Girl flipped out over the typically Japanese amalgamation of Japanese Western cooking on our menu, and when the teacher heard about it, he nodded in total agreement, and that information got passed on to the lunchroom, resulting in Desolation Girl swapping email addresses with 3 of the school cooks, which only deepened our respect for her.
でもそんな殺伐ちゃんがクラスで飼っている魚たちに手を出した時には、ぎょっとして30人中21人か22人は目を向いたけれども、手を出したいと言ってもデメキンを縛いだとかそういうことではなくって、水槽を2日か3日間だけ謎めいた液体で濁らせて、その後には魚たちの大繁殖が起きて、私たちは率直に言って仰天した。
But when Desolation Girl made a move for the class fishbowl, 21 or 22 out of the 30 students watched wide-eyed, even though she wasn't abusing the pop-eyed goldfish or anything like that. But what she was actually doing was mixing some mysterious fluid into the bowl for a couple of days, and after that the fish started breeding like crazy, which honestly blew us away.
その謎めいた液体は実は醤油だったとか、いやいや魚醤というアジアっぽい魔法の調味料だったとか、クラスではいろいろささやかれたけれども、殺伐ちゃんはうふふと笑うだけで本当のことは教えてくれず、それでも私たちに向かってなかなかの推理だわねとか、魚醤というのはちょっとは近いわねとかなんとか言ってくれて、私たちはポイントはやっぱり魚介だなこれはと推察した。
There were whispers in class that the liquid in question was in fact soy sauce, or maybe some Asiatic miracle condiment called fish sauce, but Desolation Girls just chuckled and wouldn't tell us what was really in it, even though she did look at us and say that we were on the right track, and fish sauce was pretty close, which we took to mean that the substance was most likely piscine in nature.
一月が経つと殺伐ちゃんにはどうやら得意料理があるらしいとの噂が広まり、どうもラザニアがそうらしいということは男の子も聞きつけたけれども、そのラザニアにはミートソースは決して使われずに代わりに魚介のソースが使われるんだと突き止めたのは3人の女の子だったので、この後の3日間はクラスではガールズが優位に立った。
After a month or so, rumors started going around that Desolation Girl was skilled at making a particular dish, which even the boys heard was lasagna, but it was the girls who figured out that her secret was to use fish sauce instead of meat sauce, and so the girls were the toast of the class for a good 3 days straight.
アサリがね、と殺伐ちゃんは言った。ゴロッと入っていないとね。
You have to have clams, Desolation Girl told us, loads of clams.
このフレーズは校長先生の翌週の月曜の朝礼でも引用された。
The principal repeated that phrase the next Monday during assembly.
私たちはなんだか全教育者から殺伐ちゃんに質問してもいいよライセンスを授けられたように感じて、そこで本人にアンケートを取ってみたところ、好物はピータンでオランダ語が話せて、掃除の時はできればリーダーをやらせてもらいたいと願っていることが分かった。
We somehow felt that the educated had basically given us license to ask Desolation Girl anything we wanted, so we had her complete a questionnaire through which we discovered that her favorite food was century eggs, and that she could speak Dutch, and that if possible she wanted to be put in charge during cleanup.
殺伐ちゃんは結構音楽が得意で私たちは殺伐ちゃんの得意科目って音楽だよねと聞いたんだけれども、殺伐ちゃんはどうだろうなと首をかしげて、本当は式典でね、君が代の代わりにね、パンク君が代を歌うのが得意なんだけれども、これは科目ではないわねと答えたので、私たちはうわーっと叫んだ。
Because Desolation Girl was really good at music, we asked if music was her best subject, but she cocked her head and said, I mean, I can sing a pretty mean punk rock version of the national anthem at school functions, but that's not technically a subject now, is it? And with that, once again, we were blown away.
そのうちにクラスであなたたちの将来になりたいものは何ですかって課題というかお題が出て、当然のように私たちは自分がどう回答するべきかに集中したんだけれども、同時に他の人はどう回答するんだろうと思ったし、誰であれ一番気になったのは殺伐ちゃんの答えだった。
At some point, the topic of what we wanted to be when we grew up came up in class, and while we were all focused on coming up with our own answers, everyone wanted to know what everyone else was going to say, and we most of all were excited to know what Desolation Girl was going to say.
テレビでさ、と殺伐ちゃんは語り出したクラス担任までゴクッと唾を飲んだ。天気予報の番組あるでしょ？
You know, on TV, Desolation Girl started. Even the teacher was holding his breath now. They have weather forecast shows, right?
あるあると私たち。
Right, said the class.
あるわよね。お天気番組、お天気ガイド。あれね、どのチャンネルの、どの時間帯のも、本当に天気予報だってみんな思ってるでしょ？嘘よ。それは嘘なの。だいたい8つに1つは予報はしてないの。予言しかしてないの。わかる？みんなわかる？先生わかる？予報はね、外れちゃうことも多いわ。だって予測した事柄に過ぎないもの。でもね、予言はね、外れない。だって予言なんだもの。ほら。バッチリ当たっちゃうお天気番組ってたまにあるでしょ？あれ、予言。たまに結果バッチリのお天気ガイドがあるわけで、それ、予言。そういう時、気象予報士は仮の姿よ。あの人たち、本当はただの人間を超えてるのよ。ビヨンド人間よ。ビヨンドヒューマンよ。この人たちには当たる確率なんて関係ない。だって起こしてるんだもの。私それになろうかなーって思って。はい。こちらの天気図をご覧になって、ほら、荒れた天気がいっぱい来ますわよ。暴風、高波、大雪、猛吹雪。だからお気をつけになって、猛吹雪が来るんだから猛烈に反省して、これは人類の罪よ、罪とか言ってね、私叱っちゃおうかなーなんてね、ちゃんとノーマルな天気図ならぬ気象予言図出してね、きっと私、人類をネクストステップに入れられると思うの。どうですか？みんな、どう思う？
Right? Weather shows, weather guides, you probably think each one of them, every program on every channel is forecasting the weather, right? But it's not true. It's a lie. Almost 1 in 8 isn't forecasting at all. They're prophesying. You know what I mean? Everyone. Sensei, forecasts miss the mark all the time because they're nothing but estimates. Prophecies, on the other hand, never miss. I mean, they're prophecies. You know how sometimes there are weather shows that are just spot on? Those are prophecies. You know how sometimes weather guys are always on the mark? Prophecies. Those people pretend to be weather forecasters, but they're more than just people. They're beyond people, beyond human. For them, probability means nothing because they make things happen. That's what I want to do when I grow up and give people hell like Here's a sneak peek at the weather to come. See how bad things will get. Gales and tidal waves and heavy snows and blizzards. Better be careful. A blizzard is on the way, so it's high time to repent. Mankind is living in sin. Sin! And I'll have weather maps, way better than the normal ones, like weather oracle maps. I think I can get mankind to the next step. Well, everyone, what do you think?
100% 賛成だった。もちろんクラス担任もその担任の先生の指導のもとに私たちは NHK に推薦状を送った。
We were with her 100%, and so was our teacher. We wrote a letter of recommendation to the Japan Broadcasting Corporation under his enthusiastic supervision.
That's it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ted. His reading is awesome. So I'm Hideo Furukawa. It's my turn, and it's my turn to speak in Japanese. 今のはすごい短い小説です。僕はすごく巨大な分厚い小説を書くことが多くてメガノベリストと言われることもありますが、とても短い小説もよく書いています。
So the one that I just read is a very short piece, and often people know me as a writer of very long novels. They call me a mega novelist, but I also like to write very short pieces like this.
先ほどの川上美恵子さんの話で、想像と妄想という話がとても面白かったんですけども、美恵子さんが妄想と詩が直結しているとしたら、僕は妄想はこういうとても短いベリーショートストーリーというかサドンフィクションというか、そういうものとつながっているなと自分で感じました。
And I found what Mieko Kawakami talked about earlier about imagination and delusion very interesting. And if for Mieko, delusion is connected to poetry, for me it might be connected to these very short stories or sudden stories.
こういう短い小説は結構浮かんでくるんですよ。で、なんでそんな話が浮かんでくるのかなといつも不思議に思ってるんですけど、長い小説の場合は美恵子さんも説明したけど、世界がかっちりとできていないといけない。小説の中のリアリズムが必要とされている。だから何日も何年もかけて真剣に考え続けて書いているんで、ポンポンアイデアが浮かんでくるわけではありません。
And for me, these short stories, these very short stories are kind of easy to come up with. I can think of so many different ones, and I wondered why. And with long novels, you really need to have structure. You have to have some kind of reality within the novel, and it's a product of a lot of thinking, and it takes days and months and years to write long novels.
一方でこういう短いものは日常のちょっとした体験から生まれることが多いです。今読んだ殺伐ちゃん、デソレーションガールっていうのは、ある日、地球上の海を探検して回る海洋観測船の人たちが着ている服を売っている店に行ったんですね。
But these short stories can come from anything, from everyday experiences. And so, for example, this Desolation Girl, the story came from my experience of going to a clothing shop of
海洋観測船
ocean
Salvation
observation marine observation ship that sells clothes, a clothing store. Oh, so it's a uniform for the crew who go on these marine observations.
気温が何度でも着れるあったかい服で水に濡れても大丈夫という服で、僕はその3ヶ月後ぐらいにロシアのサハリンというところに行く仕事の予定があったんで、この服を買ってしまえと思って買ってしまったんです。
So apparently these special uniforms can be worn in any temperature, any condition. It's waterproof, and I happen to be going to Sakhalin in Russia for work, and so on a whim I bought this clothing.
その服をショッピングバッグに入れて東京を、南から北へ30分ほど歩いていて、お腹が空いたので中華料理を食べようとしたら目星の店が閉まっていて、仕方がない、これからどうしたらいいだろうと思って駅前でぼーっとしていたら、今読んだ最初の1パラグラフ目がそのままの文体で頭に浮かんできてしまったんです。
So I bought this uniform, put it in the shopping bag, and I was walking in Tokyo from south to north for 30 minutes, and I wanted to go get Chinese food at this restaurant, and I was aiming for it, but when I got there it was closed, and at that precise moment the first paragraph of this piece just came to me as I read it, word for word.
その時自分は妻と一緒にいたので頭に浮かんだフレーズをちょっとこれ聞いてみてと、さっき言ったままの文体で彼女に聞かせたら彼女が笑ったので書いてみようかなと続きをという感じでこの作品は生まれてきました。
So I was with my wife at the time, so when the paragraph came to me, I recited it to her word for word, and she laughed. And so I thought that was a good sign, and I decided to continue writing the rest.
ただ不思議なのはその海洋観測船のユニフォームを持って歩いていたからこの話が生まれたのか、それとも東京を青山という場所から千駄ヶ谷という北の場所へ南から北へ歩いていたその途中で見た風景とかでこの小説を思いついたのか、中華料理を食べたかったのに店が閉まっていて食べさせてもらえなかったから生まれたのかがわからないんですよ。
But what's really puzzling me is whether the story was born because of the uniform that I was carrying in my shopping bag, or because of the process of walking from south to north from this area called Aoyama to Sendagaya and the landscape that I saw in the process, or because I wanted Chinese food really badly and the store was closed, and that was why the story was born. I really don't know.
小説の不思議なところは機械のプロセッサーと違ってこういう材料を入れたからこういう小説が生まれてくるというわけではないです。何か小説家入れようといつもしているんだけど出てくるものは全然こっちの方に出たりこっちの方に出たり変わってしまうんですよね。
So the mystery of novel writing, it's not like a machine where you put in one thing and something comes out. It's you put in all sorts of ingredients and sometimes it comes out this way, sometimes it comes out that way. It's kind of unpredictable.
そして一人の作家ごとにここを通過すると変わってしまうことがいろんな作家の存在する価値だと思います。この紀ノ国屋の中にこれだけの本がありますけれども、みんな同じ情報を入れたら同じ答えが出るならこんなに本はいらないわけです。地球上に、何万人何百万人の作家がいるのか僕は分かりませんけれど、それくらいの作家がいる意味はインプットしても間がブラックボックスでアウトプットが変わってしまうからだと思います。
And I think it's because each novelist is different in this process of putting in and then processing and coming out that so many books exist in this world. I mean, we're in Kinokuniya bookstore now. There's so many books on the shelves. Maybe there are millions of writers in the world. I don't know how many exactly, but the really important thing is that depending on the writer, what you put in, there's like a black box in the middle. So what you put in and what comes out is different, and that's why so much literature exists.
今日まさに小説以外のジャンルでそれと同じことを感じさせる体験をしました。今ニューヨークのジャパンソサエティで東日本大震災を元にした写真展をやっています。ここには2桁の数の写真家が参加しています。
And precisely, I had this experience of experiencing a different genre today by going to a photo exhibit at the Japan Society. They're having a special exhibit on photography about the Great Tohoku earthquake, and about a dozen photographers are featured in the exhibit.
入り口の方の場所では津波の被害、地震の被害を直接撮った写真が多く飾られていました。ただ奥の方に行くと、地震や津波、放射能災害のことを知っている海外の人には理解できないようなキノコの写真だの、そういったものが集まり始めました。
So towards the entrance, there are a lot of photography that depicts the disaster itself, about crumbled buildings and the direct effect of the earthquake. But then the further you go in, it becomes a lot more symbolic. And if people came and saw those photos without knowledge of the earthquake, you wouldn't know what they were about, but they would be pictures of mushrooms, for example.
キノコが写っている理由はとても簡単で、日本の人なら大体知っているように放射性物質をキノコが吸収していったからです。海外の人に地震、津波、ニュークリアデザスターが起きたということを伝えるときに、普通はやはり破壊された原子炉の写真や津波で破壊された海辺の町の写真を見せると思います。ただ日本人は当時の報道でそれをある意味で見飽きてしまった。彼らにもう一度大震災の被害を繰り返させるためには、例えば美しいキノコを科学的な撮り方で見せるだと、写真家一人一人がこうすれば伝わるんではないか、こうアウトプットすべきではないかという自分への問いかけと 格闘と答えの出し方をしていったんだと思います。
So actually, it's easy to understand why a photographer would depict a mushroom. It's because mushrooms absorbed all of the nuclear radiation that leaked due to the earthquake and the tsunami. And Japanese people have seen so many images of destruction after the earthquake and the tsunami, so much so that in order to reflect, that's not what people need to see. It's maybe a picture of a perfectly beautiful mushroom that's photographed in a very scientific, very matter-of-fact way that has even more impact. And I think that the photographers really must have struggled and thought about what would be the most effective in putting up a show at this moment about the earthquake.
100人の写真家がこの世にいていい理由は、被写体が1個でも100人が100枚の別な写真を作れるからだと思うんです。そんな風に今日は2人の小説家がここにいますけれども、川上美恵子と古川秀は同じことを体験しても全然違う作品を書いていきます。こうやって一人一人が違う書き方を出していくときに、それを読んだ人、それを見た人、読者やビューアーというものが自分なりにはどう感じたらいいんだろうっていう手助けを得るのではないかなというふうに感じています。
So if you have 100 photographers, even if the object is the same, you can have 100 different ways of taking the photograph, of presenting the object. And so today we have two authors, myself and Mieko Kawakami, and even if we experience the same thing, we have very different outputs. And also the readers must receive our works differently.
今日ジャパンソサエティのその写真展に誘われたのは、僕が震災に関わって書いた本というのが先月英訳されまして、これがジャパンソサエティのこの展覧会の、ブッククラブの方に選ばれたと。で、6月4日にブッククラブをやるんで、その前に著者の古川さんにも来てくださいと誘われて行ってきました。
So the reason why I went to the Japan Society photo exhibit today was because my book was translated recently, Horses, in the end, the light remains. And it was selected as a reading for a book club on June 4th. And so they invited me in preparation for it to come to Japan Society.
この本は写真に例えるとすごい難しい立場にいて、例えば震災の起きた悲劇を忠実にドキュメントしているだけではないですし、僕は福島に生まれて、実は実家がしいたけマッシュルームを作っているので、本当にキノコということを考え続けてて、でもそういう家族が悲劇に見舞われているということを書く気もなかったし、で第三の道として小説家がこの悲劇に巻き込まれたっていう道を選んで書くことを選択したんですね。
So if I were to think of this as a photograph, it's really hard to describe what it is, but it's not only a document of the disaster. There are elements of reality depicting my own background. My family actually owns a mushroom farm, and so there's a lot of connection with the photo that I saw at the Japan Society, but I didn't just want to depict tragedy as it is.
そういう自分なりの一人の小説家としてのドキュメントを留めておくと、とても不思議なことが起こるなと今日は感じています。というのも5年前にモンキービジネスの第1号が出て、ここニューヨークで1回目のモンキーツアーが行われたんです。僕も来たんです。でその体験をまさに震災直後の日々を綴ったフォーセス小説の中に書いていて、モンキーツアーのことも書いています。あの時同じ期間で5月1日にオサマ・ビン・ラディンが殺されて、それこそローランドがいきなりこういうニュースがある、オサマが殺されたと言ってきたんですけど、まさにその体験の渦中にいたただ一人の日本人のことが書き留められています。
So this is really a document for me as a novelist. 5 years ago, when the first issue of Monkey Business came out, I was part of the original Monkey Business tour group, and in this novel, I actually write about my experience on the tour, and it just so happened that directly following the earthquake 5 years ago, in May, Osama bin Laden was killed, and Roland actually told me while we were on tour that he was killed, and so I write about all of that as a novelist being in New York and experiencing all of those things happening in the world.
そうやって一人の日本人がニューヨーク体験を書き留めておいてよかったなと思うのは、5年前の 今頃のことはみんな覚えてるかどうかわからないですけども、ツインタワーが崩れた跡地で USA の合唱があった。僕は翌日にツインタワーの跡地に行ったんですけれども、なんていうのかな、複雑な感情を覚えたんですね。それはアメリカでこういうテロが起きるとはっきりと悪役がいて、その悪役を殺せばいい。だけど地震で日本列島が揺らされて、津波が来て、原発事故が起きて、悪役って誰なんだろう。なんか地面の下に悪いデビルでもいて、そいつをアメリカの特殊部隊雇って殺させればいいのか。そんなことできない。自分たちは何にも憎めない。これは何なんだろう。それをその当時の気持ちで書き留めています。
So when I came here 5 years ago, I visited. So when the Twin Towers fell after 9/11, many Americans would chanted, USA, USA. There's a lot of nationalistic sentiment. And after one of the events, I went to Ground Zero, and I had a very mixed feeling. With 9/11, there was a clear object of kind of enemy of what was evil. But with a natural disaster that Japan had faced, there really wasn't a clear bad guy. There was no evil that we could ask the American army to go and kill. There's no object of hatred in a way, and so I had a very mixed feeling about that.
そうやって書いた自分の文章が今英語になって、それこそアメリカのニューヨークのここにいる人たちにも読んでもらえる形になったというのは、本というものの持つ不思議なパワーだなとつくづく感じています。
And so the book depicts those dilemmas that I was facing and thinking about at the time. And so that document I had written in Japanese as a novel, and now it's been translated into English and available for you to read. And that's really a powerful experience for me. I really think about the power of books, the power of literature in this process.
これは本が、読書をしてくれた人たちやこの世界にもたらす良い側面だと思っていて、本というアウトプットが生まれた後ですね。ただ一方で今日の最初の話にあるように、本が生まれる最初、なんでこんなへんてこな、妄想なのか想像なのか誕生してきたんだろうという秘密は今も自分には分かりません。
And so what I've been talking about is the good aspect of books, that a book can be produced, it can be read by readership. But then when you come back to the very beginning of the process of writing, it's very messy. This divide between delusion and imagination. I really don't know what to make of that very murky state.
ただ例えばニューヨークならばこれだけ広い場所で、昨日だったらリトルイタリーの方に迷い込んだり、今日だったらば本当こっちの方の地域に来たりすると、住んでいる人々それぞれのニューヨークの姿があって、ニューヨークのストーリーを書きなさいと言ったら、やはり100人が100通りのニューヨークを書くんだろうなとも感じます。
And walking around New York this time around, yesterday I was wandering through Little Italy. Today I was walking around this neighborhood, and New York is so different depending on where you are. And I think that if 100 people were to write about New York, there would be 100 different stories.
これは日本の首都の東京という大きな都市でも同じです。100人の東京に住んでいる人間がいたら100通りの東京の小説が生まれると思います。
And that's the same as Tokyo. If there were 100 people writing about Tokyo, there would be 100 different stories.
ただ僕は今発表した最新の小説で、東京からいろんな小説が生まれるけど、じゃあ東京そのものはどこから生まれてきたんだろうというちょっと根源的な問いを始めました。
So in my latest novel, there are a lot of stories that are written about Tokyo. People write about Tokyo, but then in my latest novel, I was thinking about, well, what about Tokyo itself? Where did Tokyo come from?
その小説は一人の18歳の少女がヒロインなんですけども、そのヒロインを主人公にしたものが、モンキービジネスの6号の、巻末に入っています。
And in that novel, there's a protagonist. The protagonist is an 18-year-old girl, and it's included. The beginning part is included in the 6th issue.
At the end.
At the end, is included in the 6th issue of Monkey Business.
その少女は心臓病を先天的に持っていて、ずっと病院の中にいたので東京を歩き回れません。歩き回れないけども東京にずっと暮らしている。彼女はこの東京はどこから生まれてきたんだろうと思った時、海辺の街で潮の匂いを感じて、海で波の音を聞きながら、巨大な海洋生物がこのビーチに打ち上げられて、その死骸から東京という街は生まれてきたんではないかと想像します。
So the 18-year-old girl who's the protagonist has a heart disease in the novel, and she can't walk around Tokyo as she pleases. But she's wondering where Tokyo came from, and she goes to a beach, and she smells the salt, and she listens to the waves, and she imagines a massive sea creature washed up, and she imagines that Tokyo was created from the decaying body of this massive sea creature.
彼女は今存在している一番大きなクジラよりも100倍も300倍も大きなクジラが昔はいたんじゃないかと考えて、そのクジラが打ち上げられた死骸が腐って腐った肉から土地が豊かになって肥沃になって農業が始まり、その巨大なクジラの骨を砕いて建物を作ってきて都市のブロックが誕生し、そういうことを想像し始めます。
She imagines that a whale that is 100 times, 300 times larger than the biggest whale that exists today was washed up, and its body decaying and creating this fertile soil from which farming began, and from its bones, architecture was created.
彼女は一つの大きな神話を18歳の少女なのに作り始めようとしているんですね。彼女の頭の中で生まれてくるストーリーというのは一つの儀式のように感じます。
So in her mind, she's creating a myth. It's a creation myth that she creates in her mind, and it's kind of a ceremony.
僕は小説家の頭の中ではインプットしてアウトプットする間に作家一人一人の何か儀式が存在するんではないか、作家一人一人の祈りなのか何なのか、そういった神話を求める力が働いているんじゃないかなと、この小説を書きながら書き手なのに検証するっていう体験をしました。
So in the process of writing this novel, I was thinking about, putting the ingredients in and then going through this process within the novelist's mind and having an output. And this middle process being some sort of ceremony, some sort of prayer, and kind of a seeking of a myth. And even though I'm the writer writing this novel, I was thinking of that kind of structure as I was writing.
ニューヨークのようにもともと100人がいたら100人の意見があって、だから民主主義が必要な国はこういう話は当然だと思いますけれども、日本みたいに一つの出来事があるとみんなが同じように考えなくてはいけないという圧力がある国では、小説のようなあるいは写真のような一つの出来事を100人が100通りの見方をしていくものは希望を与えていくんではないかなと思い、そう信じてここからも生み続けていければいいなと思っています。
So perhaps in New York, it's almost normal. It's ordinary for people to think, well, if there's 100 people, there are 100 ways to write. There's nothing unique in that. But in Japan, there's such a pressure to conform and to follow. And so that kind of thinking really gives me hope. And I want to continue to write with this hope in mind.
最後に今話した小説の少女がクジラから東京が生まれたと考えて、その現実の東京の上でその少女とメキシコ人とあるいは日本人とが出会っていく僕が書いた小説のシーンを一人で読むのではなく、何人もの人種の何人もの人間でちょっと読んでみたいと思います。ローランドと柴田さんとお願い
So
します。
lastly, I'm going to give a reading about the girl who thinks that Tokyo is formed from a whale, and there's a scene where she's conversing with the girl from Mexico. And so instead of me reading the entire piece, I want to share this reading with people from different races. So Ted and Roland and Moto, and I will read from the piece.
Well, in the beginning, I told you how these new writers write a very energetic, complicated prose, and it gives the translator a hard time. Now you know what it is, what it's like, and you've seen how heroic our translators are too.
You should mention for this reading, Moto is playing the part of an 18-year-old girl, and I'm supposed to be Mexican. So, unfortunately, Moto is much better at doing an 18-year-old girl than I am at pretending to be Mexican. So, you'll have to imagine that I'm speaking with a mellifluous and melodious Spanish accent. I can't. Okay.
Sure.
That day, Uran strolled through Tokyo with the Mexican artist. It was the first time the two of them had walked alone together around the city, the interpreter having been unavoidably detained. Yet they hardly noticed. By this time, both Uran and Gabriel were used to getting around. They hailed a cab, and Gabriel said with ease in Japanese, "Toyokucho Station, please." They went first to the reclamation district and the canal with its view of the harbor. Not too long a trip. Naturally, they couldn't say 90% of what they wanted to, but 10% they could.
Over there is the sports arena, the track and field stadium.
Uran said after strolling around about the pier a bit. She pointed to indicate the direction they should follow. They walked leisurely across the pedestrian overpass that bridged the main street. Lines of cars howled beneath their feet on the local road. Yet the elevated expressway, a conspicuous line running above and behind the stadium, had little traffic. Big trucks came and went, one by one.
Say, Gabo,
Uran looked up at Gabriel.
Yes, Uran?
you know, I think, Senor Gabriel, from today I will call you Gabo.
Did you call me Gabo just now?
It's all right, you can keep walking.
When you call me that in Japanese, I feel we're almost getting through to each other.
If a stranger saw us now, I bet they think we were communicating perfectly.
I can feel Japanese pretty well now, since that's what everyone around me speaks. I've come a long way.
That's right, Gabo.
See, you just responded to what I said, didn't you?
Well, I'm faking it a bit, but that's okay.
All right then, be careful going down the stairs.
Oh, the stairs, yes. Let's be careful.
Where are we headed, I wonder? That athletic field over there?
Gabriel extended his arm and pointed toward the station.
See.
Uran replied, not missing a beat.
Say, Gabo, that reminds me. How old are you? I still don't know your age.
Are you talking about the field?
Gabo, if I show you my age like this, can you guess my question? Look at my fingers. That means 10 years. Now, when I open my right hand like this, that means 5. And add that to these 3 fingers on my left hand, then you got 8 years, see?
These signs seem to carry some kind of hidden meaning.
You see? 10. And then add 8.
One message and then another message.
I'm 18, you see? Now, you tell me your age.
So that's it. You want to exercise. I was into basketball when I was young. I played till I was 16. But then I had to quit due to some unfortunate circumstances. You see, there was a gang of bad kids in the neighborhood, and ball games became too dangerous. Strange, huh? Sometime I'll tell you about the garage that dealt in stolen goods and the mobsters who hung out there.
Say, Gabo.
Yes, Sudan? Hi. Our names are all we understand.
Look over there. See the athletes running around? It's a real track, isn't it?
I was 16 then, and you're 18 now. 18. Let's see, that would make 27 years since I was 18. 27 years. Can you imagine that?
Gabriel balled his hands into fists. He stuck out 2 fingers from the right side and then, keeping the 2 right fingers stuck out there, spread open the left.
Huh? 27?
Uran smiled.
You're only 27? So young. You're so much younger than you look, Gabo. Where did all those wrinkles come from?
Uran and Gabriel gazed out on the track where the athletes were warming up. It did not appear to be an official event.
Athletes in the sea breeze.
Gabriel said.
The ancient Aztecs must have had athletes like this. Remember that old city on the lake that provided its carcass to Mexico City? I wasn't alive then, but I can picture it. It was a freshwater lake, though, so no sea breezes there.
Uran watched an athlete practicing the takeoff for the long jump. Then she watched a young man endlessly repeating his approach for some other event.
Look,
Uran said to Gabriel.
to run and jump at the highest level, one has to engage in humdrum training drills first. That's how it usually is. Don't you think so, Gabo?
But Gabriel was on another wavelength.
Nah, I'm not so sure about reincarnation.
He replied with a broad grin.
Christians believe in the resurrection, though.
Uran smiled back at him.
What's it mean anyway, this running?
She asked.
I never quite understood it, you see. I have never run once in my life. Now that I have this nuclear-powered heart, though, maybe someday I'll run.
その一言を発し
No
た直
sooner had the
後
last
風
word
景が
left
歪んだ
Roland's mouth than
今
suddenly
や
the scene
競馬場
before
の
them
背景
fractured.
のラインが
It
崩れる
felt
こと
as if
で
the
生
line
じた
behind the
ブレ
stadium
ーキを
were beginning
カ
to
ンガからクラ
collapse.
クション
There was a
交通
sound
量は
of
さほどに
squealing
なかったは
brakes
ずなのに
and
首都高
honking
で
car
並
horns
走
from the
しか
lightly
も
traveled
そこに稲垣が
expressway.
待ち
Mixed with the
その
loud
音声
neighing
が
of a
一番風
horse.
景を湧いて
The
くさせた
neighing
んだ
was what
馬
most
がかけて
distorted the
いた明ら
landscape.
かに馬が
A
首都
horse
高
and
を
the
か
rider
けて
could be
いた
seen
しかも馬上に
galloping
人
along
間
the
がいた
expressway.
乗っ
Then
て
the
いる
whole landscape
それから
warped.
風
The
景の前
laws
後にも
of
う波が生
proportion
じ
seemed
る
to go
遠近
haywire,
法が
and the
一気
horse
に来
grew
る
to an
馬のサイズが
enormous
増大す
size.
る
It
馬が
leapt
空
from
に
the
跳躍している
expressway,
馬
traveling
が
100
首都
meters
高
in
か
a
ら
single
飛び降りてい
stride.
るしかも
Clearly
尋
something
常な
other
筋
than
力で
mere
はない
muscle strength
100メ
was
ートルを飛ん
involved.
だそれ
Whether
が情
horse
報
and
な
rider
の
were
か前
jumping
方にある
upward
かが
or
裏にかわから
forward.
ない
Roland
しか
could
し
not
来
tell.
たとだけ
This
は
is
思った
it, she
馬は
thought.
瀕
They
死
have
とした
finally
サラブレッ
come.
ド
The
毛
horse
色は
was a chestnut
黒クリー
thoroughbred
ン
with a
それ
dark
からキ
mane.
シュとなっ
The
ているのは
jockey, a
男
very
性だ
young
った
man,
若い
practically a
少
boy.
年ガブリエ
Rider
ルが
was
叫んでいる
shouting
首
and
都高
pointing
と
in the
反対
opposite
側を指してい
direction.
る歩
Probably
道橋のまたい
something
でいる
on
大
the
通りだろうが
overpass
ウランはそちらが見えない
Whatever it was,
見ない
Roland could
水
not
歩
see it.
踏み出した
He took
水
several
歩
steps
整備され
toward
た
the
トラックの方に足を踏み出した
well-kept track
まるで馬
after
を
trying to
トラックに誘導するみたいに
This way!
そっちとウランは言った競馬場入り口にぐっと現れる車体がある突入だバスに似ているのはバスではなかった競馬場競走馬輸送車これは観察関係者競馬ファンの間では馬バスと呼ばれるこれは別方向でサイレンが鳴り出したいやもっと以前から鳴り響いていただからサイレンは速いしかし今は近い黒ブリのサブレットが競馬場の競技用トラックに入りそこを信じられない速度でかけて同時に馬バスを目指した実際には魚されているそれから騎士とその少年が転がり落ちた
He tumbled from the horse.
ウランは駆け
ran toward the
そうやっ
falling
て動
boy.
いてしまった
Never
から
before had
初
she
め
moved
て
in such a
走る
manner.
というの
Now
は
she knew
こう
what
いうこ
running
となんだ
meant.
と知っ
Yet the
た
boy
少
had
年は
not
転
really
落したわけ
fallen,
ではない
for no
受け身
sooner
を
had
取
he
る用意を
landed
してい
than
て
he jumped
パッ
back
と
to
立っ
his
た
feet.
奇
It
跡
looked
じみていた
miraculous. He
何
was
かブ
babbling
ツブツ言ってい
something.
るそれ
Roland
が
was
聞こえた
startled
こと
to
にも
discover
驚いた
he could understand what he was saying.
Shit! Where
どこに隠れたらいいんだよ
He
と言っ
moaned.
ている
That the
I
fucking
said-
horse wasn't
あの馬
supposed to leap that
飛び
far!
すぎだよ Thank you
Hideo Furukawa.
Goossen 元柴田Roland Kelts
Do we have time for questions, John? Sure. Okay, right. Let's take questions. Yeah. Come on. Yes.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm very curious what books were particularly influential.
What books were particularly influential to these two authors? Yeah. どんな本に特に影響を受けましたか？
このタイトルです。Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. I most influenced that book.
出てこない。
That's a hard question. I have a hard time answering
でも
that.
どうだろう。でもそうだな。でもやっぱり日本の作家で田和田陽子田和田とか。
I find it hard to think in terms of influence, but as for the Japanese authors, I can name Yoko Tawada.
なんか過去に影響を受けてるのと今受けてるのと変わってきてて、例えばそうだな。
There are writers I was influenced by in the past, and there are writers I am influenced by now.
なんかどうも最近昔のことが思い出せなくて、どんなだけでもねやっぱり横田は日本の。
And these days, I find myself thinking more and more about the past, but the name Tawada Yoko comes to me
でもあれですね、
first.
バージニア・ウルフの自分だけの部屋はもうずっとやっぱり大事なバージニア・ウルフ。
Oh,
私だけの部屋。
Virginia Woolf in her own room.
Room of one's own.
The woman's own room. Sorry.
A room of one's own.
あれはすごく大事な本です。
So what Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own is a very, very important work to me.
Okay. Any other question? Yes.
Do you frequently do
朗読はしょっちゅうなさいますか？
Very good for reading Roland.
I have made many readings in Japan, and sometimes we do the duet reading. Right?
Yes, yeah. And we do a reading play together.
Yeah.
Yes, Hideo and I and the two other, actually one other poet and one musician have been doing this reading play based on our immortal, based on novella by our immortal poet Kenji Miyazawa.
そうですね、あんまり機会はないんですけど、ただあれですね、あ、どうぞ。でもそうですね、あんまり機会はないんですけれども、やるときはやっぱり私もチェロと一緒にやったりとか、音とやることが多いですね。
I don't have too many opportunities to read, but when I do, I often collaborate with musicians, so sometimes with cello in the background.
Yes.
お話ありがとうございました。ですね、お伺いしたいのは、これも素晴らしい翻訳で感動したんですけども、ニューヨークで暮らす中で、2つ以上の言語を使って生活することが、私たち多くの方はこちらにいらっしゃる方にとって日常生活だと思うんですけども、特に英語を後から学んだ、自分のようなものにとってやはりその2つ以上の言語の中でどのようにアイデンティティを埋めていくかっていうのは非常に継続的な問題というか、ライフロングにかかる問題であるような気がしていて、で、私アメリカに来て8年目になるのでだいぶそのギャップというのは、だいぶ狭まってきたなというふうには感じてはいるんですけれども、その翻訳をしていくという作業の中でどのように作家のパーソナリティやアイデンティティを統一していくのか、あるいは作家の方にとってそういったような問題っていうのは自分のものが他の翻訳者の言葉によって多言語化された時に、そこに自分のパーソナリティや同一性というのをどのように捉えるのかというところに特に先ほど川上さんのマイベイビーという声の中で、私がすごくあって思ったのは、日本語の中では、目的語、it っていう部分がなくて、その、詳しいところがおめでたいんですけど、母子手帳のビニール袋の中に挟んだっていう表現だと思うんですけども、それ英語では、my emotion って言ってたんです。それをイモーションっていうふうに訳されたのは、川上さんともちろんお話をされた上でエモーションにしたんだと思ったと想像したんですけど例えばそれは私が例えば日本語であえて感情というふうに置き換えてなかったとしたら、なんか非常にそこはセンシティブなポイントなんじゃないのかなと思いまして、そういったようなそのアイデンティティのところと、表現の細部というかそういうところにすごい衝撃を受けました。
I guess the question has to be translated.
That's right, yeah.
So the question was, as someone living in New York between two languages, there's a lot of question about identity that I am constantly struggling with, and when it comes to translation, what I wanted to ask was to the writers is what happens when something that you've written is translated into another language. What happens to the writer's identity? What happens to the unity of identity that you put into the work? And then especially, specifically in Mieko Kawakami's story, My Baby, the gender in Japanese is left ambiguous, and in English, the word it has to be used, where in Japanese you can kind of avoid that. So I wanted to ask about the linguistic choice. Also, there's a in the reading about slipping in the emotions into the vinyl pouch in the maternity health blog, and in Japanese the word emotion is not there, and that might be a critical moment because it has to be specified in English, or it is in this translation. How I guess I, as a translator, made that choice, if it was in consultation with the writer, etc. So identity.
It's easier for a translator to answer that question. If you're a translator, you don't need any identity. You have to be empty.
Yeah, I think I taught translation from Japanese into English at Tokyo University in Moto's program for a couple of years. And one of the difficult things for when you read a translation and you compare it to the original is, especially because people are trained in the schoolroom, they start looking immediately for mistakes or for differences. Whereas, in fact, when you look critically at a translation, what you really are concerned about is voice and rhythm. And whether the translator has been able to somehow grasp in broad terms that style and that writer's essence. And so you have to move away from looking at very specific what's included and what's not included, and look in those larger kinds of terms, and try to grasp how a rhythm in English can somehow be used as an equivalent to a rhythm in Japanese. The language is so different. So it's very much a creative thing. It's another black box, right? It's another black box. One translator might come out with something substantially different than another translator, but it'll be within those terms of rhythm and voice.
Can I say something about My Baby? Okay, so I translated the My Baby piece. So I mean, there's so much in Mieko's work that's wonderfully ambiguous and left out and vague and all of those things that when I'm translated into English, it's such a dilemma what to do with those things. I think in my first draft, it's just as I try to leave as much vagueness as possible. I mean, for the baby, I really couldn't avoid that. I could have said he. I think you suggested maybe making this he, but I didn't want to do that either. The my emotion, I don't know. That must have been my interpretation. But so those choices, some of them are choices that I made after a lot of thought. But in terms of the voice, I've translated a lot from Mieko Kawakami-san's work, and I think in that process, because I've done so many, I've created a kind of identity, I think, not her identity, not my identity, but kind of this middle ground identity or voice that I think is persistent in a lot of the works that I've done. So that helps, translating one author over time, and many different genres too. But then there's something so strong in her work that hopefully that comes through in every piece that I do. But yeah, but we do talk. When I have a question, she's very, very generous to answer. But at the same time, she's often hands off. She says, "Oh, you can kind of interpret however I want," and then I just rely on my translator persona that I've created to make the right choice.
翻訳家がいっぱいいるところで翻訳の良し悪しを語るわけにいかないので別な話をしますけれども、本を書いて出版されると作家は本を生んだと思っていると思いますが、それは間違いです。その本は誰かが開いて読まない限り生まれません。
So I'm not going to talk too much about translation because there are so many wonderful translators here, but I'll talk about books, and a lot of people think writing a book is like giving birth, but that's not exactly true. There's no birth unless there's a reader that physically takes and opens and reads the book.
でも日本語で書かれた本をアメリカ人の、日本語を読めない読者が開いてもやはり生まれないんですね。読めないですから。翻訳家はある国のある言語の読者が開いたら読める形にもう一回生み直してるんです。翻訳の良し悪しよりももう一度生んでくれてる人がそこにいるということがとても素晴らしいことだと思っています。
So if there's a book that's written in Japanese, even if an American reader opens it, it's not possible to read it. So there's a double birth process. There's the birth of the book, the original book, but then the translator is also part of giving birth. There's a process of birth involved in translating.
私がその翻訳してもらうときに翻訳者に、望んでることがもしあるとしたら、日本語をオリジナルテキストを読んだときに、掴むエッセンスみたいなものをもうどんなふうに形を変えてもらってもいいので、それをその翻訳者の、感覚と言葉で移し替えてもらえたらなっていう気持ちがだけなんですよね。だからタイトルも変わるし、日本語ですごくいい日本語ですごく素晴らしいいいタイトル、例えばタイトルとかセンテンスのセンスみたいなものと、やっぱり英語におけるそれって違うと思うんですよね。それはオリジナルで書いてる本人には分かり得ない部分が多いので、まずその翻訳者との信頼関係っていうのが何よりもテキストにとって大事だっていうふうに痛感してます。
So when my works are being translated into English, my biggest hope is that when reading the translation, that some kind of essence that's in the original text gets conveyed into English. So even if the form is it takes a different form or choice of words, I really rely on the translator's kind of sensibility and linguistic choice in conveying that essence. So the title may change, certain expressions may change, but what makes sense in Japanese is not necessarily what makes sense in English. So I can't be a judge of that aspect. So I think the trust between a translator and the writer is really important.
So that's, I think, what we have time for today. But this has been a wonderful...
Take one more.
Take one more?
Yeah.
You want to ask a question?
No, not me. We have time for one more.
We can do one more. I'm sorry. Okay. You got your hand up first.
Sure, one for the editorial stuff. Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of monkey business in English, since this is the 6th volume? What kind of things have worked? What kind of new approaches are you looking at for future editions?
Yeah, I mean, looking back at the first volume, I think we didn't really know what we were doing, but we managed to...
We still don't.
But we started to build something, and as it's gone along, we've added people like Tiffany to help us. The kind of division of labor has become clearer. We've developed translators who are wonderful, so that's obviously key. And actually, these tours, at the beginning I thought, my God, are we really going to try to do all these things? And not that many people knew about us. Like today, last night, the standing room, right now when we give presentations. And the writers we brought, we've become friends with them. So a kind of community has evolved. So to talk about how monkey business has changed, really it's best to put it in human terms. In terms of the quality of the literature, I think it's been consistent. Of course, someone like Hideo Furukawa has a story in every issue. And Mieko has a story in 5 issues now in a row. So people who are reading Monkey Business become more and more familiar, right? Not just with the magazine, but with the writers who appear in the magazine. And Monkey Business writers have done exceedingly well, winning all kinds of prizes, Akutagawa prizes, other prizes, major recognition since they've been publishing with us. It's not that we're the reason for that. It's that especially Moto has a wonderful eye to see who are the writers of the future. And that's what you can find here. And it's not like stuff that was written 5 or 10 years ago. It's stuff that was probably written last year. That's the advantage of a literary magazine. It goes to one in Japanese. Quickly we say, this is good, we want to publish it in English. We pick that up, we publish it in our next issue. So it's a fresh fish, not dried or salted. Anyway, is that...
That's great.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's good.
And that's it, guys. So please do buy lots of books, and we would love to sign them for you. I have a pen now.
I'll bring you some time.
So thank you all very, very much for coming.
Thank you.